Alrighty. So hello everyone. So today we're going to make a simple to-do app. So I have the completed project here. It doesn't look too pretty, but it is what it is. So first, let's just see how this works. So when we input something and we hit submit, it shows up and also clears the text of the user input itself. So we can do this however much we want. But there's also this button down here and this drop down that contains the indexes of each of these tasks. So if we want to remove one, so when we click this button, this should only be removed and this task list should be resized and the index should change. So cook should become 1 and homework will stay as index 0. And that's what we see here. So if we do that again, we'll do that. And as we see, when we remove something, the index option will be also removed from the drop down. So if we have nothing in the task list, we have nothing here. And if we do something here, oh, it shows up. Great. Alrighty, so let's get started. So we provided you this thing. Hopefully you've already checked it out, and hopefully this is just a hint, or if you got stuck on something. So let's get started. So we first gotta, well actually, let's first create everything that we're gonna need. So first we need to create a text box and change the ID to display. So let's go ahead and do that. Display. And I'm gonna go ahead and resize it just because I find it a little bit easier to work with if it's a bit larger. Alrighty. And then we're going to create a user input and label it as user input. We can keep it just as that size. And we also want to create a button for submitting. So let's go ahead and do that. And we also want to label the ID as submit. Next, we're going to create that drop down and label it as remove drop down. Let's go ahead and get rid of all these options that started out. Finally, we want the final button and label it as remove. Alrighty. Also, a little neat thing here. We wanted to change the theme a bit. We can. So let me go ahead and make a nicer looking one. Let's choose this one. Alrighty. So the first thing that we need to do is create a task list. So the task list is going to contain all the user input that we grab from here in this little section. So let's go ahead and do that. So if we go over here, we can go ahead and do this. So let's rename that to tasks. I did this in the wrong spot. It's up here. And when we make a list, we want to initialize it with these two brackets. Not brackets, rather. Actually, yes, they are brackets. So when we do this, it tells JavaScript that we're gonna be using this variable as a list. And so now that we have that, we can go ahead and make this event function that will handle the submit button. So let's go ahead and do that. So for the on event, we'll find that up here. Find our submit button. We can keep that on click. These are all just kind of the events that trigger what's going to when the on event is called. And we are just going to call the function handle submit. We can also just, instead of having this here, we can get rid of this function call and just keep it like this. Well, that's not necessary, it just makes it a little bit cleaner, and I prefer it like that. Now that we have that done, we cannot duplicate that. We can make another one. Now I'm looking at it, there's a couple of things wrong with this. So let's create the on event for the remove button. So it's also going to be a click because it's a button. And we will do another function call, but instead of handle submit, we're going to be handle remove. Okay, so whenever this button is clicked, this on event function will process, and likewise if we do click this button, this will process. Just to show you that it works in its current state, we can go ahead and just do console.log. Hello. And if we run this and click remove, we should see hello. Perfect. That's great. So that we've done that, let's move on to the actual functions that handle stuff. So handle submit. So it's going to grab whatever text is in here, and it's going to store that in a variable called user input. And then we're going to clear this string, whatever this text box rather, because if we don't, then it will just keep on, and that's just a little bit annoying to use. So it has no functional purpose. It's just cleaner looking that way. And then finally, we're going to call the function update screen, which will actually handle all of the stuff that we need it to do. So first, we're going to grab variable block and label it input, and then we are going to get text and put it in here, and it's going to be user input, that right there. So now that we have that, this gets the text, and then we'll store it right here. So now we want to set this to an empty variable, to an empty string rather. So for that, we'll scroll down and get a set text. As long as I can find it, there it is. So user input, and then we can just clear this because we don't want anything to be in this box after the submit button is called. And finally, we are going to call update screen. Now, if you notice, there are no spaces in variables and function names, and because of that, yeah, we had a space, it causes an error. So because of that, I use a syntax writing and variable naming scheme called camel case, where the first letter is always lowercase, and then every word after that is going to be a capital. So that makes no sense, but that is in camel case. Alrighty, so now let's move on to handling this button right here. So we're going to do pretty much the exact same thing, except we do know that whatever is going to be in here are going to be the indexes. So those will always be numbers. So instead of doing get text, we can do get number instead. And we'll change the ID to the remove dropdown. And then next we will remove the index, remove the element of the of the element. Sorry about that, lost my train of thought there. So we're going to remove the element at the specific index, if that makes sense. So when we have the remove, we want the list and then the index, and the index will be whatever element is at the specific index that we specified will be removed from the list itself. So we're going to put the input there, and then finally we will call the function update screen. We also don't need a parameter because update screen will not accept any parameters and it will just cause errors. So the update screen actually handles the functionality of displaying the stored tasks in the task array onto this little text area here, and it will also update the options for remove dropdown. So if we were to add some options, we can see that we have these options here. So we want to, in the code, add those options of the indexes of the current array. So for that, we're first going to create two variables, one called index, and that won't have anything stored in it because we don't need it to store anything yet. We'll set that later. And then we want to store an empty string. Let me resize the screen a little bit. There we go. So we want to set display. We want to create a variable called display text and set it to an empty string. An empty string is just this, two quotation marks with nothing in it. And then we want to make a for loop. So our for loop will go through our task array and then kind of modify that just a little bit so that we can have our each task displayed on a new line, as well as have our indexes displayed next to it. Alrighty. So first, we want to change here. We're going to go into this a little bit and remove the initialize because we already initialized the index up here. So we're going to change that. Change that. And then instead of having this here, we're gonna use task list, and we're going to write dot length, and that will return the value, the number of elements in the array itself. Also, if you don't know, lists are zero index. So if we had a little console.log here, and we had an array of a couple integers, and we're going to grab the element at index 0, or actually let's do index 1. We do that, then we're going to have the number 2 returned because that is index 0. And if we call 0, we get 1. So because the indexes are 0 arrayed, here are the actual indexes. If I can write it right. There we go. So 1 matches up to the index of 0 and so on. Alrighty, so All right, so this is where display text is going to come in handy. So we are going to do this right here. We're going to change that to display text. So from this comment above, we know that we want to have the index, we want our string to look something like the index, so that could be 0, then whatever task we have, and then we want a new line. If we don't add a new line, everything will come on the same line, which is not ideal. So for that, we're going to have index plus tasks, index plus a new line right here. So that is going to have the index, and then we'll have a dot and a period after the index, and then we'll have the actual task itself at the given index, and then we'll add a new line. And one last thing that we want to do is it's easier if I do this. Display text plus. So that will just that will add the new element to the last element. And then, so now, oh, that's the same thing that we just did. Let me remove that. So now that we have everything in display text that we want to display, we can now set the text to this area right here. So for that, we'll use set text. We'll change the ID to display because this has an ID of display. If I actually do that, there we go. And then instead of having a string right here, we will call display text. Now, so when this is called, everything in display text will display here. So now that we have that, we want to work on updating the remove dropdown every time we update the screen. So for that, let's create a new list. Let's call this remove options. And because it's going to be a list, we're going to put that as an array. And now we want to loop through the elements of task list and add the indexes to remove options. So for that, we'll create another for loop. Let me add this here. And like before, we already have index initialized, so we can just remove this. Scroll down. Index. And then we'll get the task length. And that should be completed there. Okay, so we want to add the current index list from the list. To move on. And to do that, go back to variables and add append item. Options. And we will add index here. Now there's something I realized up above. So we never add the input to the task array. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll do the same method here. Append text. So we'll add the current input to task. So append input will add the item that we add to the list at the end of the list. And with that looks good. We should be fine there. We should be fine there. And finally, now that we have every index into the remove options, we can just set the properties. So for that, we'll go back to UI controls. We're looking for set property here. There we go. Alrighty, so for this, we gotta get drop down. We want to change this to options. And finally, we will change this to remove drop down. Let's look at this. Whoopsie. Remove options. Like this, task. These are very helpful. They will tell you different things. Just if there's something that isn't looking right. And with that, everything should work. So let's go ahead and check. It's looking good so far. So if we do that, perfect. So let's just add some gibberish here so we can test this out. So if we remove 2, we should see this gone. And we do. All right, that's perfect. And with this, so we learned a couple things. So we learned about functions, we learned about for loops. We also learned how to modify text. These are all important things, and hopefully they'll get you started on your own little project.